All right, let me welcome everybody again. I'm now recording. We're talking about how, when we look at angels, angels start out one way and wind up over hundreds and hundreds of years in very, very different ways. And what is interesting in angels, the way they start and the way we see them now in iconography is very, very different. Plus, we have a whole new parallel talking about angels in the late 20th and early 21st century. It really is not so much about angelic beings, but in terms of personal experiences and somebody you feel or something super special has been guiding you and speaking to you. We'll get to that later. In terms of angels, the big deal becomes how this separates from the beginning. In the very beginning, we had things, beings, no name, no wings, no halos, no personalities. They meet Abraham. Another couple of angels, no wings, no halos, no personalities, are meeting Lot in Sodom. No power, no anything else. That's all we know. These are guardians or spokespersons. Later on in the book of Joshua, we'll meet somebody who's the commander of the angelic hosts. But the big deal with angels comes at the great 586 when UP go into exile. And in 586, Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed, and roughly 5,000 of the top scribes, Pharisees, what's left of the priests, etc., are moved forcibly to Babylon. In Babylon, and this is, you're going to see this crop up because you're going to see this in the Bible. This is what you're going to get most of. Two very, very different competing groups that will be formulating what we now call the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. One group is a group of priests that are left, and they are absolutely obsessive about maintaining certain rituals, the way rituals are done. And they want to be sure that if they ever get back, it will be done, in their opinion, the correct way. You can see where this is going to go. Another group is a group of historians that want to try to explain not only the history of Israel and Judah, how we got here in exile and why, which means they have a point of view. They're going to be looking at history and various things in front of them, but they're going to have a very, very strict point of view. And that's going to come across again and again and again. Two very, very different competing groups. And you're going to get to see, when you really start studying the texts, the different points of view and how they don't get along. Two classic examples. In Exodus 33, one group has, and Moses spoke to God face to face as a friend. In the same chapter, on verse 20, it says, you see God face to face, you're going to die. Hello, that's a major contradiction. Two editorial groups. The final editor looked at this, screamed and said, what do I do? And decided to pick neither and just keep them there. You see this on the famous story of the flood. Is it 40 days and 40 nights, or is it 150 days? The final editor looked at this, screamed again, and said, what do I do? And kept both. Then you're going to get the priestly side doing things that make absolutely no sense. I don't know if you've ever studied this. You've ever heard the story of Moses coming down the mountain and they were worshiping a golden calf? You ever heard that story? It is complete bunk, and I'll tell you why. First of all, let's take a look. I don't know why when people read scriptures, common sense goes out the window. All right, you got a bunch of peasants. And by the way, the text says a mixed multitude, which means they're not all Jewish. They're not all Hebrew. Forget the word Jewish, Hebrew. They're not all Hebrew. A mixed multitude also went up. That's what the text says. So you get a mixed group, and they're now out in the desert near a mountainous area because there are mountains in the desert, especially northwestern Arabia has a lot of mountains, by the way, and so does the Sinai. So they are out there, and according to the story, Moses comes down from a mountain and sees them worshiping a golden calf. So get the story. You are hot-footing it out, you're escaping, and suddenly Maureen says to Doug, ooh, we need a crucible. And Doug says, what are you talking about? We need a crucible. Why? We got to melt gold. You have no idea what that's talking about. It doesn't make any sense. You have to have a crucible. Why? Because if you're going to melt a gold, if you're going to make a golden calf, how are you going to make one? You're going to have to melt gold. Now, here's an interesting number for you. 1,948. You need 1,948 degrees Fahrenheit to melt gold. Where the hell are you going to find that in the Sinai Peninsula to light up and make that kind of heat? You're not. You need a crucible. You need fire to get the crucible that hot before it's going to melt gold. And you might be saying, where are they going to get the gold? According to the text, the wealthy gave all their gold to a bunch of fleeing peasants. I don't think so. So you get a bunch of fleeing peasants. Maureen is screaming to Doug, bring a crucible, really? All right, so let's for argument's sake, saying you've got a crucible, you've got gold. What are you going to burn to give you 1,948 degrees Fahrenheit? All right, then you say, okay, we'll do it. What are you going to pour it into? One of my students one time said, in the sand, you can like make a thing. I said, you're going to pour molten gold into something you made by hand in the sand. What is wrong with you? The whole class laughed. They said, that's not stupid. He said, yeah, that's right. So let's see if I got this right. Maureen is screaming as we're running for our lives, a bunch of filthy, sweaty, smelly peasants, and says to Doug, bring a crucible. And then she's screaming at Danny Sorkin, don't forget the mold. Sorkin's going, what mold for what? She says a golden calf. What for a golden calf? Why do we have golden calves? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And on top of it, it turns out golden calves, are you ready for this? Drum roll, were never worshipped. Yes, we've dug up tons of golden calves. Guess what? On the back of the golden calves are ridges. It was understood gods stood on the calf as a symbol of protection. So what you had is in the kingdom of Israel, when it's separated from the kingdom of Judah, a golden calf on the southern border, a golden calf on the northern border, on which Yahweh symbolically stood to celebrate and to guard the borders of Israel. Little tiny Judah in the south hated this. And since when they had a chance, since their scribes and priests were hello from the south, they got the dig in, making fun of everybody else and building up Moses. You're going to see Moses saying things that absolutely make no sense for somebody who was a peasant in 1200 BCE. So remember, the Pharisees and scribes in Babylon are writing 700 years later. 700 years later. So when you see things in text and you're saying, does that make any sense? That doesn't make sense to me. You're right. You're getting people writing much, much later, with two very, very different points of view, but sometimes they get tripped up. And I'll give you an example. There were old census forms, and you have Joshua. This is a riot because it's in the book of Judges, all these old census forms. And you have in the book of Joshua, Joshua having a three-pronged attack and wiping out the land of Canaan. But then in the book of Judges, it lists it says, and these cities remain Canaanite to this day. So we took a map of Canaan and push pins in all these cities that will remain Canaanite to this day. It was most of Canaan. So they had these old census forms that didn't make any sense with the later edition of Joshua having this massive three-pronged attack. By the way, to show you how messed up this was, in the 500s, they had Joshua conquering the mighty city of Ai, capital A-I. In fact, we now find out that in that time, Ai was not a noun, it was an adjective, and the adjective was a small a and a small I, and it meant heap of ruins. So these people writing hundreds of years later had a Joshua attacking a heap of ruins. This is why you don't take things out of context. And when I tell my students, when you look at something, stop. Who wrote it? Why was it written? When was it written? For whom was it written? Where was it written? You ask questions. If not, you're going to get something way out of context that makes no sense. And I keep on asking everybody why does common sense go out the window? And I'll do this once again because it's funny. We just did it again this week about Moses putting Moses as a baby in a basket floating down the Nile. And I said, everybody, take out your imaginary stopwatch. I just put the baby in the basket, going through a fest of crocodiles. Take out your stopwatch. How long is this going to last? And everybody roared. They said, where is this? I said, it's in the Bible. People, why does common sense go out the window? So we've got stories. Stories are to make a point. And people don't understand these stories in the Bible were never meant to be taken literally. The rabbis in the beginning didn't. They were meant to make a point, because who listens to sermons? Seriously, who listens to sermons and remembers anything? A good story, though. Oh, yes. A good story you remember. I remember when I went to seminary, which is about the time dirt appeared on the planet, Gardner Taylor came from Concord Baptist Church. We were all wondering, why are we having a Baptist at Union Theological Seminary's chapel? Well, he gets up there, and Gardner Taylor was the size of a barrel. I mean, he was that big around, and he wasn't very tall. And my God, when he opened his mouth, you thought God was speaking as a black Southern Baptist with a baritone voice. When he spoke, you listened. And he told the story of Jonah. And by the time he finished, you understood the power of telling a story. And he said in the middle of it, he said, you don't take this literally, but did you get the point? Because you'll remember this. I remember that from the fall of 1967. 2 weeks later, he's followed by, you ready for this dude in a kilt, another skinny little guy with lace in his neck. We're going, what the hell is this? George MacLeod from the Church of Scotland. He was telling the story of the 10 lepers. Man, by the time he finished with that, we were all on edge, and we saw Gardner Taylor and George MacLeod and God morph from being a black Southern Baptist to a Scot with lace with a burr. They knew the art of storytelling. And that's how you made points in antiquity. You didn't nitpick over the I's and T's and take it literally. They didn't make sense. The stories were not, they weren't meant to make, they're meant to make a grand point. Now, doesn't that make sense? Well, okay. Sounds like your sermons. Oh, okay. Anyway, you get what I'm trying to say. Angels, in the point, they were trying to make a point. There were no wings, no halos, no names, no real personalities, messengers, and originally guards in Eden. These were not fellows, by the way. These were not people and guards to keep you out of Eden. Why? Because they had flaming swords. Not nice. Then we move on to where we are trying to bring us up to date. After the exile, we find, or during the exile, the time of the exile, we find, are you ready for this? We find absolutely incredible stories about angels. I'm going to pull one up for you. I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to want somebody to read this. Roy, are you there today? Can I pick on you? Where did it go? Roy, are you there?
I am here.
Okay, let me pick on you today. Because you'll have, all right, have fun with this. Start reading verse 4. Ezekiel was a priest in exile. And chapter 1 was, according to the Orthodox rabbis, so horrific, you were not allowed, you were forbidden to read it till you were 30 years old. Now, this is where the real stuff of angels begins, in one sense. It begins in Babylon, of course, with wings and all the rest of that and power. But Ezekiel will have visions. Roy, would you do us a favor and read us this vision?
Sure. As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the middle of the fire, something like gleaming amber.
Right, now stop. Now stop. Wait a second. If I got up on Sunday morning or any other time and I said, I have seen it, a stormy wind from the north and fire flashing in brightness, you are going to ask me questions about my health. And so just get a context here. if you or I were listening to somebody saying this, or I was saying it, Ezekiel is saying it, and it's written down. So obviously people felt it had worth. I'll leave it to you. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Roy. Go ahead. This gets really interesting.
In the middle of it was something like 4 creatures. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Thus their wings touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the 4 had the face of a human being, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. In the middle of the living creatures, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. The fire was bright, and lightning issued from the fire. The living creatures darted to and fro like a flash of lightning.
Okay, I want you to go back and read just verse 8.
My eyes are not that good, so I can look.
Okay, I'll read it. I got it. Okay.
Oh, I see it. Under the wings of the 4 sides, they had human hands.
But stop. Okay, what I did in class was I'd have Maureen stand up. Maureen, put your hands like this. There's her wings. Now I would have another student put hands. So imagine your wings, and this is wing. Under the wings were hands. Can you imagine how weird that? Look at that. Yes, yes. This is a strange class. All right. So I asked the professor, obviously said, how does this happen? And Samuel Tarian was a very, very internationally known Hebrew scholar, and he said, pharmacia is not to be ruled out. He said Native Americans used it, and I can't believe how stupid I am. I said, what do you mean by pharmacia? And my classmate said, what is wrong with you? I said, what do you mean? I don't understand. He said, drugs. Oh. And then I said, I can't believe how stupid I'm saying. Can you use that? I was an embarrassment even back then. So you get the use of and so you have these visions. Notice wings, fire, power. All right. Here's one pictorial. Do you have a picture of that? Can you pull that up, Doug? I don't know how to do this. Doug, how do we get that up?
Click on the link.
Huh?
Click on the link.
Okay, put the link back up again. Let me get it up here. All right, this one. Oh, yes. Yes. That looks like somebody in this class, and I will not say who. I will be very kind. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Now let's see how I get out of this. What have I done? There we go. There. Okay. So you have an ancient tradition of using pharmacia. Native Americans, peyote, have often done that. I remember one of the great scenes was a shaman said he was the eye of a hawk, and he explained vividly everything he saw on his journey. I mean, you couldn't make this up. I mean, it was like he was flying and he was in the hawk's eye. So the idea then of visions that are extraordinary, I mean, he had it. He had the Valley of the Dry Bones too. Remember the one about the dry bones, that the bones came clacking together? He had these visions, which is the first time in Judaism we really have the introduction of visions of these kinds of extraordinary ideas and imagery. The use of pharmacia. And you'll also notice how now the angels have these things have wings. Later interpretation will be these things have wings. These are angels. So in Babylon, then you get a whole new iconography of angels. You get wings and power and strength and swords and flaming. This is not part of Judaism. It became a part of Judaism in the exile. And I think a classic example of this is wherever you move, you tend to pick up after a while where you're living. Now, I don't know if Maureen would agree with this. And I don't know about Doug with Munich, but I do know that after having lived in Miami now since 1995, I am so used to and so infused with multicultural language, thought, people and stuff. If I leave here, I feel very uncomfortable. I feel incredibly uncomfortable. I cannot be.
Can I get a witness?
Huh?
Can I get a witness?
Yeah. My skin crawls. I feel uncomfortable. I need to be around cultures, languages, smells and sights and scents and all this stuff. I need to be around with that. And I'm thinking, maybe that may explain it. I did mention to you all as a side thing. Did I tell you I'll be teaching next semester, much to my surprise? Did I mention that? Okay, let me tell you what happened this week. This has blown my mind away. Monday was the first day of special registration. It's not open yet to the rest of the campus. It's dual enrollment students, nurses, and special students. 2 of my classes have already filled. And I think the reason for that is because I represent and am an embodiment of what it means to be in a multicultural society, in a multi-valued, multi-tiered environment. I mean, I teach as if we're all in this together. I don't teach at, you know that. I mean, I work with, and it's, so I think that what we're getting in Babylon then is a soaking up of the culture around. And not only, there is a way to audit it, but no, there isn't. Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. These students are a riot, by the way. I have to tell you, the students are a riot. They're not shy. They share things. I love it. The things I learned from my students. And then they write papers. And I told the students, your job is to teach me. And I said to my students, a good teacher is always a good student. They're not used to hearing that. They never heard that before, they tell me. And I said, so your papers are to keep me up to date on things that I'm out of date with, or introduce me to stuff I've never studied before. So every semester, can you imagine how cool that is to get tons of written work, keeping you up to date? Oh, you have to be enrolled. You just can't audit anymore. Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that. So anyway, the thing is you get to learn all the time. I find being in this kind of environment. So what happened with the scribes, without realizing it, and the historians and other exiles, they picked up Babylonian culture. You look at chapter 1 of Genesis, it's the Gilgamesh creation epic. Basically, the layout of the Gilgamesh creation epic is chapter 1 with day 1, day 2, day 3. You put them side by side. And so you're going to get along with that Egyptian thought, because the Egyptians never seem to be far away throughout the history of Israel, interacting. So between Babylon on one hand and Egypt on the other, you soak up all this culture. The Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon, is a classic morph and synthesis of Babylonian and erotic love poetry. And I was telling my students, we did text and context. I said, you're going to hear, if you've never read this poetry, you're going to hear that this is for traditional Judaism, this is an allegory of God in Israel, or for fundamentalist Christianity, this is Jesus and his church. I said, since when does God and Israel are represented as I am black and beautiful? And that's the way it starts out. I am black and beautiful. I said, is God black and beautiful? I said, that would be good. Is Israel black and beautiful? I bet you they never thought of that. I said, Jesus is black and beautiful. That's good for me. The church, as racist as it often is black and beautiful. They obviously didn't get the message. Then we read chapter 7, where they're talking about rounded thighs? Oh, yes. I said, and what, Israel is rounded thighs in chapter 7? This is an allegory. Very interesting. Delectable maiden. I said, obviously they didn't read the text. God is a delectable maiden. Nobody filled me in. The class is going absolutely rioting and laughing. And I said, this is what the text says. You read the text. Don't let somebody else tell you what the text says. You read it, and then you ask yourself, oh, the coconut palms. Oh, you forgot that. Oh, this is embarrassing. Sam remembers that from 14 years ago. In chapter 7, it says, your breasts are like clusters on a palm tree. I say, I will lay hold of those clusters. I will climb the palm tree. Hallelujah. I will climb. I say, I will climb the palm tree and lay hold of those branches and those clusters. Hallelujah. The coconuts, the breast, my oh, so almighty. I did that with a class. They just rushed it. That's the text. And somebody says, it is the text. He's not making it. I had to share it in front of them. So when you see things like this is a classic example, don't let somebody tell you what it's about. You read it for yourself. Anyway, in Babylon, you get these ideas of angels, and it carries over to the book of Daniel, and that's where either it all goes south or it gets interesting. It's your call. Suddenly, we now have names. The book of Daniel is written about 165 BCE. It is roughly 1,500 years from the story of Abraham. In Abraham, we have simple, formless beings, messengers, no names, no halos, no harps, no trumpets, no swords. They just deliver messages. By the time we get to Daniel, we have Michael, we have Gabriel for the first time, and we have ranks of angels, lots of angels everywhere. Who knew? I find this fascinating. How can you go from simple to like ranks, names? And this comes up to a question of interpretation. What do you do with something like this? And this gets to the heart of things. Do you say, hey, this is interesting. Somebody had a fabulous imagination. This is interesting to look at. Versus what often happens, since it's in the Bible, and that famous phrase, it is written, therefore you must believe this. And I think that's where we come to major issues. I have no problem looking at somebody's imagination. What I have a problem with is somebody demanding I accept their imagination as gospel, it is written truth. Are you following what I'm saying? And I think probably that's why we gather. We like to look at these texts to see what their background is, what's going on. But don't for a minute demand that I must accept them literally, and this is the way it is. So Daniel is the one that starts reflecting then all of this that gets handed down from the exile of Gabriel and Michael and ranks of angels. Then two books you have never read, Tobit, and then Enoch, which you're only going to find, are you ready for this? In Ethiopian language. That's it. Gaz, G-A-Z. I can't even pronounce it. In this one, you're going to love this. Are you ready for this? Sit back. Let me read you the roll. You get 7 archangels. We now have archangels, folks. Uriel, Raphael, Raguel, Michael, Sariel, Gabriel, and Remuel. 7 of them. And we are supposed to take this obscure work as the final word. Also in the book of Enoch, you and I are told about the watchers, the evil ones. Yeah, the evil ones. Now, this is a fascinating thing because I pulled this up with my students. Let me share this again. Because this is a classic example of why. Where did you go? Where did you go? Bear with me. Maureen, I'm going to ask you to read. Yes. This is a classic example of why, what happens if you don't understand texts. The book of Enoch says that the watchers are basically evil and we need to watch out for them. And this is supposed to be the word. Yet this is what we find in Genesis, written hundreds and hundreds of years earlier. Maureen, would you read this joyful little piece? And nobody, by the way, knows why it made it into Genesis. Nobody has a clue.
When people began to multiply on the face of the ground, and daughters were born to them.
Okay, stop right there. I tell my students, whenever you see something like that, red flags need to go up everywhere, because why doesn't it say sons and daughters? If it just says daughters, you know this is not going to be good. Am I right? It should say sons and daughters. If you just pick out daughters, you know this is not going to be good. Go ahead.
And the sons of God saw that they
did
were
you know
fair.
God had sons? Let me remind you again. Yes, or angels. It can be angels or sons. One way or the other, these males behaved in ways. Go ahead, Maureen.
And they took wives for themselves of all that they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in mortals forever, for they are flesh, and their days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humans, who bore children unto them. Those were the heroes that were of old, warriors of renown.
Okay, first of all, this thing has a number of issues. Notice the sons of God just went grabbing women right and left. There's no discussion, they just went grabbing women. And who does God get mad at in this thing? Does he get mad at the sons of God? No, he gets mad at humans. What is this?
Women, you know, the originators of original sin.
I mean, seriously, look at this. But this is what's interesting. Enoch is totally different. These were heroes that were of old, warriors of renown. That is a very positive, powerful statement. Enoch
Sounds like the Titans of Greek mythology.
Absolutely, absolutely. What happens is Enoch, however, which I find fascinating, Enoch will carry the day. And now when you look at kids looking at gaming and everything else, they will come across watchers as bad and evil, and they think this is what's in the Bible. Enoch is not in the Bible. It's a interesting work that is parallel out there in another universe, parallel to the text. All right, Sammy had a thing up. Where's Sammy? I missed the chat. What did she say? What did you have, Sammy? Patriarchy, yes. And I always tell my students to watch out for that. Okay, so in Enoch then, we have the watchers. Oh, and he added one more to that at the very end, Jemiel. That's not Jeremiel, Jeremiel. All right, let me read to you from chapter 8, from page 8. It is interesting to note that in early Christianity, it wasn't until the 5th century, that's 500 years after Jesus lived and died, that some anonymous monk decided that passages needed to be helped. I always love that. And therefore suggested there was a 9-level angelic hierarchy: angels, archangels, principalities, powers, virtues, dominations, thrones, cherubim, and seraphim. Later on, you're going to see this in Jewish thought with Maimonides. None of this is actually in the Bible. None of it is the way it happened before. Now, probably the most sustained attempt to understand angels was by Thomas Aquinas, who had this whole thing on angels. Remember the famous thing, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? If there is a God, I hope God was not listening when that whole argument took place. All right, moving along then, we had angels in Islam, and Islam basically followed people of the book. And who are people of the book? Judaism and Christianity, except the angels, Michael and Gabriel, and I can't pronounce it in the way it's in the Quran. It was Jabril and Mikhail. I think it's probably mispronouncing, but they added 2 more, Harut and Marut. So there are 4 angels, Harut and Marut, that are added to Michael and Gabriel. Forget Zoroastrianism and Hinduism. As the author here points out, often what happened was Christian missionaries, in an attempt to work with Zoroastrian and Hindu thought, Christianized both of these, taking divinities and powers that be in Zoroastrianism and Hinduism and transforming them or retranslating them to angels, when neither of these kinds of concept of angels existed in Zoroaster or Hinduism. So we need to know that. It's, again, one more attempt to what? Translate and make something is that it isn't. All right. Now, this I thought was a very interesting quote. Angels are prominent in post-Christian patterns of spirituality. This can be seen from the place of angels in the mind, body section that exist in many high street bookshops. Angels remain attractive because they appeal to the imagination and to personal experience. They are a non-threatening element from established religion. And that's an interesting thing, because when you look at angels today, when people talk about angels, it has very little to do with the iconography, the history, ranks upon ranks of angels. And it's interesting, though. Maureen might find this interesting. I did. Traditionally, in the beginning, Christianity was very, very wary of picturing angels. They could talk about it. And so is Judaism, because of the forbidden making of images. The concern was originally, if you make an image, you're going to begin to worship it. Now, I'll give you a classic example of this in our terms of church history. When you have Christmas time, you've heard of the famous Three Kings pageant. Okay, you know, three kings are never mentioned in the Bible. And you're probably sick of this story because it is funny. When I was teaching New Testament, I mentioned this, and one of the students says to me, "That's not true." And the class groaned, and I said, "Okay, look at Matthew chapter 2. Please read it for us, the first two verses." He got to the point, "Wise men from the east." And he looked up to me and he yelled at me, "You changed this." And the whole class roared like I would change the Gospel of Matthew. All right, let me tell you what happened. It makes sense. Most of the people are illiterate. So how do you translate texts when people are illiterate? You make pageants. You make statues, and later on, you'll make pictures of glass, all right, images. In the beginning, you're making images, statues, or paintings. The famous iconography controversy will happen hundreds of years later. And you'll make plays. So on the Iberian Peninsula, 200 to 300 years after Jesus died, to try to explain why Matthew thought this was a magnificent birth, they didn't know what to say. Wise men didn't resonate with the peasants, but three kings. Three kings, you give names, and so you put on this whole pageant and everybody gets this as a special birth. The fact of the matter, this was never mentioned in the Bible at all, tells you that you know, it goes out the window. Besides the story, by the way, it's a story. It doesn't make sense for two reasons. Nobody else knows about anything about kings, about wise men visiting Jesus. We do this all the time. Ron is a little big. Ron, go wah. You go wah. All right, Pat Sullivan, this is your baby son, Ron. This is Pat's son, Ron. Wah. I know one more wah.
Wah.
All right, thank you. He's crying.
Yeah.
He's crying. We are in a peasant village called Bethlehem. Most scholars think he was born in Nazareth, but we're in a peasant village of Bethlehem. Does everybody know everybody's business? All right. So these dudes come in camels, dressed obviously from Persia, all that stuff, perfume, this whole thing of camels. Do you think the whole world's not going to know about this? Seriously. I said to my students, all right, one of you was born down in the main thing in Baptist Hospital down there on Kendall Drive. A bunch of dudes drive up in the top line Rolls Royces and Bentleys. They get out with shake stuff right now, and they march up to your mother, and they give her all this stuff and say your child is born. With all the news be all over the place immediately. Hello. I said, use common sense. People don't use common sense. It kills me. I said, obviously, and then it said this stupid phrase, and they departed quietly and unknown from the area. Herod the Great was paranoid. There were only two major roads going east. He had the roads watched like there was no tomorrow. He even killed a bunch of his own family. He was paranoid. Nobody did anything without him knowing it. To say these dudes dressed like this are going to just escape, I don't think so. To think a whole caravan with perfume, turbans, and everything else is going to go unnoticed in a peasant village? It's a great story trying to make a point. But again, when you divorce reality from context, it drives me nuts. And I think that's what drives everybody else nuts. How can you celebrate a simple birth and say, isn't this cool, without all the other stuff? I mean, the stories are nice, but then people take them literally. So what happened here? You have a pageant to celebrate something, and in no time, it takes it literally. And then you tell people after 2,000 years of celebrating this pageant, it's only a story. They get really mad. The Roman Catholics in town, the priests in town, have tried to tell everybody when they have the Three Kings pageant at the bottom, remember, this did not actually happen. And their own constituents got really mad. Really, really mad. What do you mean it didn't happen? Well, it didn't happen. It's just a pageant. So then we've got then with the picturing of angels, we have then, let me read what happens with angels then, very, very quickly, about what happens with angels. First of all, when Solomon built his temple, he had a pagan whose name was Hiram, who was an architect. He was loaned by his good friend Hiram, same name, who was the Phoenician king of Tyre. So he has a pagan build a pagan temple. You're with me? I mean, that's what they look like. The Temple of Jerusalem was not a Jewish building. It didn't look distinctly Jewish or Hebrew. It was a pagan building built by a pagan. What made it different was inside were particular Jewish artifacts, but the outside and everything else was classically pagan architecture. I mean, what did Hiram do? He was a pagan architect. And so they carved angels, which you're going to get from other cultures. And it says that Solomon built a temple. In the sanctuary, he placed two cherubim that were 17 feet high and how many feet long? Doesn't say how many feet wide. 17 feet high. And he built these two things because all the pagan temples had cherubim in them. This was not a unique thing to Judaism. And then you're going to have them armed and changed. And by the time you get to the time of Jesus, you're going to have angels with, are you ready for this? Halos, some harps begin to make it in, and trumpets. Trumpets, the blasting of the trumpet. None of this is what you had in Abraham. And so hundreds of years later, each thing gets added on and added on and added on. But notice in the New Age, that is not the way, and you talk about New Age thought today, that is not the way angels are pictured. That's considered quaint iconography. Today, angels are, and I think one of our own here said they considered an angel their own personal guide and their own personal protector, something they felt as an aura, but not in a feathered, haloed thing kind of way. And any of you have ever gone to special parts? Well, we haven't been to a bookstore. I haven't been to a bookstore since before COVID. But there'd be certain sections, and what you see in New Age thought is very, very different than what's sounds like a very Protestant to me, a personal deity. It's interesting. I'm not sure if the angels are not considered deities. They're considered gifts from God, something.
Yeah, but what I was trying to indicate was the personal nature, right?
Yes.
The Protestants feel they have a personal, telephone to God, and angels becoming personal guardians rather than keepers of sacramental stuff for the
Right.
church at large.
Okay. This gets to be, by the way, Carl Jung did something. I never thought about this before we closed today. Carl Jung said, you know, there are two different ways. How do you approach God? Now, I'm using God now as a being, understanding that most of us have varieties of ways of looking at God or a higher power or the divine. Personally, I love the Hindu definition of Brahman, but that's just me. Everybody has different definitions. And that's the way we function here. That's what keeps us. I think, by the way, it is absolutely essential that we have a Sufi kind of way to move us, an atheist way to keep us from going nuts. One of our members is Russian Orthodox in background and keeps a spirituality that's so we got all these things to keep us from going totally off the ranch. You know, that it's like we need this all here to keep us on the same ranch. If not, we're going to go out and no, God knows where. We have no guardrails. That's what our guardrails are. You've got some Russian Orthodox spirituality, some atheism, some Sufi, the guardrails to keep us from going out there. Jung said the idea of having an intermediary approaching a divine being has certain value. The problem is when the intermediaries become corrupt. He said the idea of the Protestants saying you can approach the divine. Think about that. Are you really going to want to approach God personally? Have you really ever thought about how scary that could be? So both are loaded with issues, just for what it's worth. Okay, I have a quote, chapter 19 about, oh, here's a picture. I don't know if you can see this. This is an interesting picture. Can you see that? That is in the book. I was fascinated by this because this is an angel that is very, very different than the iconography that'll take place, and we'll get to that later on, in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. This is called
Angel of the North.
Yes.
The Angel of the North.
How did you know that?
It's in Northern England.
Is it? I thought it was like Norway or no, really?
No. Yeah, it's by Anthony Gormley. I think he's still alive.
It's on page 25 of the book.
26 of the book.
26.
Yeah. All right. The thing that fascinated about it is really more in keeping with the iconography, if you will, of the earliest iconography, when you had angels. What bothered me was the perfectly formed homoerotic butt and legs. I'm serious. Don't laugh at me. I mean, this is being taped, but I'm serious. This looks like a perfectly beautiful male model. I mean, if this is what angels are supposed to look like, perfectly beautiful male models, all right. I mean, but I'm looking at this, and then but this is very, very, yeah. Now I can't see if there's any facial expressions on this or not. If it's just all plain. But the idea is that there is no personality, no halo, no, and this is really much more in keeping, oddly enough, with the most early representations, not the Renaissance and later ones. Fascinating art. Okay, what I'd like us to do then is look at chapter 3, 32 through 46, next class. And I want you to think ahead of what we want to do for Karen Armstrong. I think it's a great idea that we do, Karen. I think she appeals to everybody. It's a good thing. Danny and Maureen came up with a book. Let's throw some others out there. That book is perfectly fine. It's very affordable. It's a nice way to spend a year because we'll be on that for a long time. But it's up to you. It's up to you. I was hoping we could finish Angels up before the new year, and then it's the new year. We could start on Saturdays again with Karen. Does that work for everybody? Does that work for everybody?
I've ordered two of them already. I ordered the one on the history of God and the one on the Bible. I've ordered already. So
they're both good. So pick your whichever.
They're both great. They're both
Okay.
fantastic.
All right, so we've got two then. Let's leave it at two, and you can just decide which one. You can do one and the other one. I mean, we don't have to. It's not we have either or. Which one do you want to do first? How's that? That might be a good way of putting it. That's good.
History of God. I don't know. It seems to be.
Okay, well, let me go around and say hello to everybody then. John, thank you, and Christine for being with us.
Okay.
And
Thank
and we got Maureen and Pat Cutmather. I have been traumatized by this, Pat Busbus. I have been traumatized. I even mentioned this in all my classes. I have been traumatized by this. Cotton Mather, they thought this was funny. They thought this was very, very funny. Rude bunch of students, actually.
Ken,
Yes.
I just wanted to say briefly, A History of God by Karen Armstrong was the first book I read after 9/11 so that I could try to understand religiosity more.
Oh,
And
okay.
I thought it was just a fantastic introduction to, for someone like an atheist like myself, really understanding the history of religion and what got us to that point.
Danny liked that too. You really recommend it then? Okay. And we've got the other one right after this. We got lots of stuff to work with. That's excellent. Okay. My rotten cousin, Doug, who introduced me to Pat. And then we've got, yes, Ron. Pat Sullivan is coming to Miami. Lord have mercy. Kathy's in the car. Samantha is finally over the moments. She's glad that it's all over. It's all, huh? Go ahead, Sam.
Can I just say one thing? When you're playing music, can we not skip Thanksgiving?
Can we not what?
Skip Thanksgiving. We jumped into Christmas music.
Oh, okay. We'll do Thanksgiving then. Okay. All right. Next time.
Is there much Thanksgiving music? I mean, what, do you have any
I don't
suggestions,
know.
Samantha?
I don't know. I mean, the only thing I can think of is the Peanuts, but
That's good.
I always tell my students, like, you can't skip holidays. You can't skip them.
All right already. Thanksgiving music it is. What an unruly bunch of people here today. All right. Sorkin, good morning to you. Roy is amazing. Gets up at like before the sun. It's always nice to have you, Roy. And my lovely neighbor from down the street, Cecilia. Okay, we've got stuff to finish. We're going to go on chapter 3. And then we've got stuff in the new year. We've got all kinds of things to look forward to. Excellent. All right, be safe and well. I sent out all the services are going to be coming up. And so please, if you have music that you like, you're interested, let me know. On the 14th, Rascal Flatts. Can you believe it? Thank you very, very much. I will record this and put it out for everybody in a little while. Be safe and well, you all. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.